Hello, good morning. So I'm Robin.
Hi, I'm Dino. Thanks for having us.
Very nice to be here. Delighted to talk to you about how we've taken Brexitcast from being what was a glint in Dino and Adam Fleming's eye through to being a kind of multi-platform digital extravaganza across TV, iPlayer, Radio 4, BBC Sounds that it is today. You may have noticed there's an election on. We've got teams that are wiring up New Broadcasting House at the moment for our results service and election programmes in a couple of weeks. Dino, you've just been slightly busy as well, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been crackers. So we decided when the election was called that we were going to change from a weekly Brexitcast on a Thursday, and then whenever we feel the need to do one, to a daily offer. And then the BBC News channel also decided they wanted a TV version at 8:30. So we dropped the podcast at around 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then we renose it as a live programme from the podcast studio with some of the content that we've recorded for the podcast earlier in the day. And that's every day. And then on Saturday we had to do, we're also doing it as a Radio 4 programme. They decided they wanted to run the podcast on linear output. And on Saturday, just gone, we had the question time debate in Sheffield, and so we couldn't pre-record the podcast for Radio 4 on the Friday night, so we had to do the Saturday edition live. So it's basically, there's no schedule, it's just all over the place. And as David said, we don't know where anyone's going to be, so we can't plan anything, basically.
So, imagine that.
So
for those of you that haven't seen it, let's have a little clip, shall we, in terms of, this was from, I think, last week, was it?
This is Brexitcast on Thursday, yeah.
Well, we know it's a little cold out there on the campaign trail, so Adam has been putting his time to good use this afternoon.
So, there you go. We've got
Is
some
this a
presents
present?
actually, you two.
Yes.
Because
Before
on
Christmas.
Friday, tomorrow, or
Presents.
maybe it's already tomorrow if you're listening to us later, is Six Music's T-shirt day, where you have to go to work wearing your favourite band's T-shirt. And so we've got you
In December.
some ABBA T-shirts.
We were thinking, you could,
Oh.
in November, you can kind of channel this in the way that occasionally political campaigners do, where they'll wear their T-shirt with a political slogan on, but then wear it
Where are
over a
yours,
shirt
boys?
or a
Yeah, well,
coat.
hang
got
on.
them for-
So,
what about
Chris
you?
has got Anna Frid for you, Katja,
Nice.
brunette, and I've got
thank you.
Agneta for you, Laura, blonde.
And now this is the
And-
moment where you're
Is
just
this a
glad you
hint?
two.
And now we're taking our shirts off.
Oh, no.
Bjorn and Benny.
I feel we should have.
Ta-da.
This is meant to be a family show.
I know.
Oh no, we haven't.
Oh
yeah,
my
we've
goodness.
got the T-shirts on.
I
you know.
think it might be better to be a podcast
No,
rather than a TV
right, let's-
program
let's-
at that
right,
particular
okay.
The problem
point.
is
No
though,
offence,
I actually didn't buy these T-shirts, so they've got a bit, as
Oh, yeah,
producer Dino said, a bit of a dad fit.
Fit from. So where were they for that?
So Laura was in a car park. She's usually in a car park in election time because she's done the 6. So getting Laura is the hardest thing. So we have to find a window for her to do it between the 6 and the 10 o'clock news. So for the Thursday night Brexitcast on BBC One, we recorded. She had to get a train to do the 10 in London. She was in Birmingham, so we had to record at 6:15 for half an hour. Turn the podcast around, and the first edit on the news channel is at 9:30. So I go straight from the gallery into an edit suite, and it's a very hairy edit.
And you had Katja in Brussels.
Katja in Brussels, the two guys in the studio.
Millbank.
Laura, the problem with that was, as you could probably pick up, there was WMT for Laura, so
Yeah.
there was a massive delay.
Yeah.
And when they're all talking over each other, it's difficult. When she's on Lucy Live, which is normally how we do her on the podcast, the delay is minimal, so it's fine. But yeah, TV throws the delay into the...
So let's talk about. We'll talk a bit about the story of how we've got there and what the setup is, and then it would be great to kind of get into more detail around actually how it is on the day and how you kind of edit that through. So if you just in terms of thinking about a bit of context here, so the election for us is in some ways it's a bit of a microcosm of some of the BBC's both greatest strengths, our public service obligations, but also some of the challenges that we've got. In their millions, people turn into our main bulletins, be they on TV, the 6, the 10, or on the Today programme, or PM. Issue is with these, they don't necessarily, the content doesn't necessarily appeal to younger audiences that much, and also they're completely time constrained. you may have a situation in the 6 or the 10 where Laura may only get 2 minutes to explain something which is incredibly complex of something that's been going on. And so for us, there is this real and present danger, Ofcom have highlighted it, that we may lose a generation unless we start actually changing the type of content that we commission, getting it to them on platforms that they want to consume content on. And that's what's behind a lot of what we've done in terms of launching products like BBC Sounds. And it's not so much the product, but in terms of the changes in the commissioning process that have happened alongside that, right? The range of content that is available on Sounds, it is very different in terms of the type of content that is now being commissioned from our traditional broadcast output. And Dino, as editor and producer, has been leading the way with a lot of that content, including Brexitcast.
Yeah, so we know that a lot of younger audiences, just as previous discussion, aren't listening to linear radio, and it's really important that we try and hit those younger audiences. So we found that on-demand is the best way to do that. The Sounds data seems to suggest at the moment that Brexitcast, 50% of its audience are under 45, which for politics is really, really good.
Yeah.
And it's doing, we've had 50, since we launched in 2017, the podcast has had 15 million downloads, which for a podcast is pretty good. Podcast about Brexit, it's pretty good. And then the TV version, of course, is doing really well. So it's really important that we kind of try and take the guys out of their formal setting where they're just, as you say, doing a two-way on the 10 o'clock news in a very kind of buttoned up way, and we let them relax with, used to do cake, we don't do that so much anymore, but we kind of let them kick back, relax, and that really changes the tone. And a lot of people, I mean, what we've noticed, obviously the podcast is doing really, really well, but then that's also informed linear platforms as well. So, then we have Mohit calling us saying, I would really want this Electioncast on Radio 4 during the campaign in a linear programme, right? So, and then BBC One saying, we'd like a bit of this as well, but we don't want you to change what you're doing. So the podcast is informing linear, which is really, really interesting. The other thing just to throw in as well is I think what we've really pioneered here in Brexitcast and Electioncast is this idea of reactive podcasting, news podcasting, which is quite, unless you've got the resource that we have and the technical capabilities that we have, to record a podcast at 10 o'clock at night and have it out within, when something really big happens, and have it out within under 2 hours, sounding like the finished product, with all the editorial considerations, is quite quick, and we're able to do that. And that's where we have our biggest numbers, is when we're there in people's feeds. They wake up the next morning and there's a podcast about what happened last night, explaining that to them.
And when it was initially a podcast, obviously, you could vary the length of these as much as you like. Now that you're fitting into the broadcast schedules, you're having to go and fit into a really defined period of time. Is that changing the nature of the program?
Not really, because they're mostly always pre-recorded. So we didn't have the luxury of recording, 2 hours worth of podcasts before anyway, because of the time restrictions on Laura and Katya. So we still edit the TV version down to fit 30 minutes. Inevitably being on TV has changed the tone slightly, but I think we're reverting to the first couple of weeks. Everyone was a bit kind of on BBC One, and now they're starting to relax again. I think, but we always had cameras before, but webcams. One of the things we insisted on was initially when BBC One came to us wanting to do it, there was a lot of pressure on us to do it to basically create a radio studio in a TV studio, which we absolutely pushed back on and said no. That will, once you have a floor manager and a director, that changes the feel. So it is still, as you're coming onto, it's still the radio studio. Yeah.
So talking a bit about some of the technology challenges for us. I mean, the BBC's never taken a podcast and taken it onto a BBC One programme before, right? So the key challenge is that this is very different from the vast majority of output that we produce. And what we're trying to do is to innovate and give people like Dino the freedom to kind of be creative and change the way in which they make programmes at the same time as maintaining this enormous breadth of audio output that we're producing across the piece. Dave Walters and the team that are here across network news, across the World Service, English regions, support 500 radio studios across the BBC in one way or another. And if you think about just one of those studios, for example, the Today programme, or a lot of our standard news output, it's run in a very, very structured, pre-programmed, pre-planned way. Today, and all of our news bulletins run on top of open media, which is used to be able to do the planning, the scheduling, the scripting of those news bulletins, sat on top of CISIS DERA, B2B, industrial grade audio edit and play out kit that is operated by very specialized production operations people, supported by in-house engineering operations teams on infrastructure that is physically hosted inside our buildings. It just works. It's very expensive, it's very rigid, it's hard and expensive to maintain 500 of those, and so the challenge for us is how we can continue to support that, as well as working with completely new teams like the ones that Dino is working with. Very different kind of feel and mix of that team, younger, changing team, used the process when it was just a podcast. This is a sketch that Chris, who's in the audience, did, of just the process of Brexitcast, almost changed to some extent every time you did the show, right?
Yeah.
And planned not on a BBC system, but planned on WhatsApp, a couple of hours before it goes on air. There's no running order. Quite often it's edited not using BBC-supported editing tools, but on Adobe or on Hindenburg. And then it's kind of a lot of kind of physical re-entering of metadata and just hard physical graft of getting it promoted out onto sounds or onto social media. It's where a lot of kind of effort we've got to try and squeeze out for your team. It still exists. So challenge for us: how do we keep going that very predictable, repeatable, dependable process for broadcast output, as well as working with Dino and the team to be more creative and innovative going forward. So I think it was end of May, June, this was, Dino,
yeah,
where we announced it was going to go on to BBC One.
Yeah.
That meant that we had about 12 weeks to be able to take this, which was the much loved but slightly antique radio studio in Millbank, to convert that into something that was going to be good enough for TV output on BBC One. As Dino said, a number of voices were like, chuck it in a TV studio. But Dino, Laura, really, we were supporting through in terms of keeping that audio first feel. And we've been able to work in a really agile way with the team, which is nice during that time. We did some early trials using existing studios in MBH for the World Service, where visualization was already being used. This was a pilot I think we did in around June. A first episode went out onto iPlayer. And we worked with Jago Design to design what we could do with that studio in terms of putting in the cameras and screens and lighting into it. It's a pretty cramped space, and I'll come on to the plan in a minute. A basic, a top-level summary of what is the kit that's in there. Obviously, we've had to put in PTZ cameras. There are 8 of them. There's Sony BRC 800s, I think. There's 8 of them, one of which is in the control room with Dino. They feed through into a homegrown piece of kit called Trigger Mix, which basically creates a rough cut of what the program will be, stitching together the video based on who is talking. We also capture each of the individual feeds from those cameras through into Jupiter, which is the video edit system that is used across BBC News. It sits on top of a Grass Valley Quantel video edit client, and basically as you're kind of live directing the program, you've got your video editor who is, as it's being recorded, making that cut for later on, right?
Yeah, that's right.
The guts of the audio in the studio we haven't changed. It's an
same.
old Calrec deck that's been there for nearly 20 years, I think. But it works, right? And it means that the audio feel is the same as it was before. It's a cramped space. It's only 14 square meters. It means we put the cameras into a recessed shelf here. That's the shelf over there. That's Dave Jones, the project manager. Put his hammer down for a minute. That was an alarmingly short period of time before the first show went out. It's an LED lighting system, which we can completely change the colours around on that, depending on what program's in there, linking through to, and because obviously it's going onto TV, we evolved what the logo and the look and feel of Brexitcast. We have an in-house graphics team who have developed this, which has evolved more into this, which is now being printed on the most lo-fi piece of equipment in the studio, which is the roller blind that sits behind you, right? Provided by Saxon Blinds, ladies and gentlemen. There they are in Northampton. Apparently other roller blind manufacturers are available.
Not as good as that one. They got us the Electioncast blind within 3 days, which was incredible.
Rapid turnaround. There you go. Yeah, we looked at the screen, but it was very heavy and very expensive. So hey, and there we are. That's the studio as it stands, which we handed over to Dino just before September 12th. So how's it been since then?
It's a dream. It's really, really excellent. It sounds excellent. You know, just to reiterate, the really important thing is we kept this as a podcast. That's the whole point, you know. So we do get a lot of people saying, why are they wearing big headphones and all that sort of stuff. And of course, Catcher isn't normally there. So we built a kind of mirror image of that on a sort of smaller scale in Brussels. So, you know, they can't see each other. And that keeping that grammar was really important. The same grammar of the podcast. You know, when Laura's in the back of a taxi and she's having to join us on FaceTime, you know, they don't know where she is. And if all of a sudden they were able to see each other, it would completely change the format. Just the thing, you know, you showed that kind of graphic of how, you know, chaotic our systems are. I mean, the tech teams at BBC News have just been incredible in supporting that, because we are a just complete mess. We rely on WeTransfer, recording audio in voice notes on iPhones, using the inbuilt iPhone mic, chucking stuff in. Like Laura will often just do 2 ways on Lucy with her Apple headphones. So tidying that up, because that's how it has to be. It doesn't work any other way. Laura will literally come up via traffic and say, I've got to do this now, guys. Let's do it. And we don't have time to worry about delays or audio quality, or you just have to make do with what it is. And I know some people might think that's not ideal, but that is literally the only way we can get this podcast out.
Well, it's been fantastic to work with you and the team, and thank you for being so flexible as we went through a pretty, as you say, at times slightly hair-raising process. And a big shout out to Andy Bocking and Dave Jones and all of the team that have worked on that particular project. It's been great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.